Chapter 9. Maria quickly regained her balance and glared at Dean, her face bright red. "It was a horse fly," Dean told her. "On your shoulder." "Huh?" Maria cried, a little stunned. "A really big horse fly," Dean repeated. "Those things can bite." "But—" Maria's expression softened. "I didn't mean to slap it that hard," Dean said softly. "Sorry if I scared you." Claudia breathed a sigh of relief. Behind her, she could hear Joy and Sophie giggling nervously. "We'd better get going," Carl said, picking up his pink and black surfboard. "Yeah, okay," Dean agreed. He cast another apologetic look at Maria. "I really didn't mean to scare you or anything," he said. Then he blurted out, "My dad used to work for your dad." "He what?" Maria demanded. But the boys had hefted their surfboards, tucked them under their arms, and started off down the beach, in the direction of town. "Thanks for lunch," Carl called back. "It was great," Dean added. Claudia watched them walk along the shoreline, kicking up wet clumps of sand as they made their way. "Let's pack up and go back to the house," Maria said, frowning. "It's too hot down here anyway." "Maria, why'd you give those guys such a hard time?" Claudia demanded. Maria was shaking out the beach blanket. She stopped and turned to Claudia. "My parents made me promise," she told her. "Promise what? No boys?" Joy asked. "My parents made me promise it would be just the four of us this week," Maria replied. "If they found out there were guys with us, they'd ground me forever." "It's not like they were sleeping over," Joy protested. "I mean, they just happened to wash up on the beach." "I don't need any trouble," Maria replied, and began folding the blanket. "That's an odd thing to say," Claudia thought, helping Sophie and Joy load up the cooler. But then she realized that what had happened with the two boys really wasn't that much different from the way Maria had treated guys at camp the previous summer. Maria had been very standoffish around guys then. As far as Claudia knew, Maria had had only one boyfriend, a guy named Michael, and they had gone together for only a few months. Joy, on the other hand, flirted as easily as she breathed, and Sophie worked hard to copy Joy, although she was less outgoing. As for herself, Claudia had gone out with a few guys, but she'd only had one real boyfriend. The problem, she decided, was that she didn't make much of an impression on guys. She met them, and they forgot her. She smiled, realizing that wasn't true with Dean and Carl. She knew she made an impression this time. They'd probably remember her forever as the girl with the really gross pink goo on her face. Later that day, the three girls were up in Claudia's room. Joy and Sophie, in shorts and sleeveless t-shirts, were sprawled on top of the quilted coverlet on the four-poster bed. Claudia stood at the open French doors, staring down as the long, late afternoon shadows spread out across the back lawn. "Does anyone here think Maria is acting a little weird?" Joy asked. "Raise your hands." Both Claudia and Sophie obediently raised their hands. "She's so tense," Sophie remarked, lying on her back, hands behind her frizzy brown hair. "She's always been a little tense around boys," Claudia said. "But she wasn't just tense, she was angry," Joy declared. "Angry that the boys were there." "She never gave them a chance," Sophie agreed. "I thought Carl was kind of cute," Joy said, grinning. "Kind of," Claudia said from the window. "But they were kind of tough, too. I think Maria was frightened. I know I was a little bit." "Maria was a lot more relaxed at camp," Sophie offered. "A lot has happened since then," Claudia said wistfully. She walked over and sat down on the edge of the bed at Sophie's feet. "Are you feeling better?" Sophie shrugged. "I'm still a little weird, kind of lightheaded." "What did it feel like?" Joy asked. "Did it hurt?" "Yeah, it hurt," Sophie told her. "It was sort of like being punched in the stomach. I couldn't breathe, and, oh, I don't know." "What a weird 2 days," Claudia commented. "We're supposed to be having fun, enjoying the beach and this incredible house. So far, it hasn't exactly been fun in the sun. You nearly got electrocuted. I got burned." "And don't forget the disgusting brown worm in my salad," Joy interrupted. "That was so gross." Claudia and Sophie laughed. "I have to tell you something, Claude," Sophie said, abruptly sitting up and cutting her laugh short. "I meant to tell you before, but I didn't have a chance." "What?" Claudia demanded, rubbing her hand over the smooth bedspread. "Why so serious all of a sudden?" "Well—" Sophie seemed hesitant to talk, then all at once the words burst out of her. "Joy and I wanted to go back for you yesterday afternoon, but Maria wouldn't let us." Claudia stared at Sophie, not quite understanding what Sophie was telling her. "When we got back from our walk, Maria insisted you had gone up to the house," Sophie continued, lowering her voice to a whisper, her eyes on the bedroom door. "We took the other path, the one up from the dunes, but Joy and I wanted to go back down to make sure you weren't still buried in the sand." "Yeah, we were worried about you," Joy added. "But Maria said she was sure you had left the beach. She insisted we go up to the house with her," Sophie whispered. "Weird," Claudia muttered. "Then she acted so surprised when you came staggering up from the beach. Burned to a crisp, Joy said. Claudia automatically touched her face. Her cheeks and forehead were hot and still a little swollen. She walked over to the makeup table to get more aloe lotion. I guess Maria was confused, Claudia said thoughtfully. If you went up on the other path, there was no way you could have seen me. I think she's messed up, Joyce said, lowering her feet to the floor and turning to face Claudia. I think the accident last summer. That's the other thing, Sophie interrupted. She never mentions her sister. She hasn't mentioned Allison once. Don't you think that's strange? I mean, we were all there last summer. We all shared it. I mean, Allison was Maria's sister, but we all... Poor Allison, Joyce said in a low whisper. That poor kid. Well, it's on my mind all the time, Sophie admitted heatedly. I'm sure it's on all of our minds, but Maria acts as if it never happened. I mean... She told me she doesn't want to talk about it, Claudia interrupted. The fresh lotion felt cool and soothing on her forehead. You asked her? Joy demanded. You mentioned Allison? We were playing tennis this morning before you guys woke up. I mentioned the accident, and Maria snapped at me. She told me she didn't want to talk about it. But it's so unnatural not to, Sophie protested. I feel like I'm bottled up. I mean, her voice trailed off. I guess Maria just wants us all to have a great time this week and forget about what happened, Claudia said thoughtfully. She stared at her burned face in the mirror. And if we could all stop being so accident-prone, I'm sure we'd have a great time. That evening, the four girls had dinner in the big formal dining room again. Sitting scrunched together at one end of the long table made the huge room seem even bigger than it was. But everyone was in a good mood. Joy told hilarious stories about her attempts to break up with a thick-headed boyfriend, who refused to get what she was saying to him. The story had the girls roaring with laughter. Then Maria told a funny story about her father showing up in the wrong country for a business meeting, and being totally confused as to why everyone was speaking Italian. Then, as Alfred began to clear the dishes from the table, Joy turned to Maria. So, she asked, what's there to do in Summerhaven at night? Not much, Maria admitted. We can see a movie, maybe. There's one old movie theater in town. It smells like cats, but sometimes they show good films. Or we could hang out on the boardwalk. Boardwalk? You mean like an amusement park? Joy asked excitedly. Yeah, Maria nodded. Let's go, Joy cried. I love rides. Me too, Sophie added enthusiastically. We've got to do bumper cars and the House of Mirrors. I love seeing myself skinny. How about you, Claude? Maria asked. Sounds good, Claudia replied. The idea of getting out of the Drexel mansion for a while and seeing other people appealed to her. She thought of the things she liked best about amusement parks. I want to ride the Ferris wheel. No way, not me, Joy blurted out. Ever since last summer, I'm afraid of heights. Oh, Sophie cried out, her mouth dropping open. Joy immediately realized what she'd said. She turned bright red. Oh, I'm sorry, Maria. I wasn't thinking. She lowered her eyes to the table. No problem, Maria said in a flat, dry voice, her eyes blank, her face completely without expression. A short while later, the four girls were in the Mercedes with Maria at the wheel, driving toward Summerhaven. Again, Claudia was struck by how isolated the mansion was on this remote point of land. The house was miles from any humans. About 20 minutes later, Maria pulled into a parking space at the edge of town, and the four girls stepped onto the boardwalk. What a change, Claudia thought. She felt as if she were 1,000 miles from the Drexel estate. The beach in town was a much narrower strip of sand. It was flat with no dunes, and even the waves seemed tamer. There were no cliffs. The sound of human voices laughing and screaming on the rides drowned out the sounds of the ocean and the gulls. The girls joined the crowds on the boardwalk. Neon lights flashed everywhere, and the mixed aromas of popcorn, hot dogs, and cotton candy floated through the air. It's crowded and noisy and friendly, Claudia found herself thinking. She realized she felt an unexpected sense of relief at being in the middle of it. They went to the House of Laughs first and spent about 15 minutes trying to find the mirror that would make Sophie look skinny. Claudia laughed at her reflection. She and Maria both appeared at least 8 feet tall. But somehow, even in the distorting mirrors, Joy managed to look perfectly proportioned and sexy. Next they rode the Sizzler, and after standing in line for nearly 20 minutes, the bumper cars. Joy, in her usual cool way, slid her car right through all traffic jams, her long black hair flying loosely behind her. To Claudia's surprise, Sophie turned into a demon driver, intent on ramming everything in sight. After the bumper cars, they made their way along the food stands that lined the boardwalk. Claudia stopped to buy a giant cone of pink cotton candy. She had just taken her first careful bite when she heard a familiar voice behind her. You have a thing for pink, don't you? She turned to see Carl smiling at her. Dean stood beside him, his blonde hair catching the light from a street lamp. The boys had changed into faded jeans, torn at the knees, and sleeveless muscle shirts. Claudia was again aware of how good-looking both boys were, in a rough sort of way. She raised a cone of pink cotton candy. Yeah, I'm going to rub it all over my face, she told Carl. The boys laughed. What are you two doing here? Maria demanded, sounding more surprised and hostile. We live here, Carl said, grinning. Yeah, right here on the boardwalk, Dean jumped in. That's my bedroom over there. He pointed to a bench between two food stands. Very cozy, Joy said, moving close to Carl. Sophie immediately imitated Joy, moving in on Dean. You guys want to do the bumper cars? Joy asked. We just did them a few minutes ago. They're fun. Yeah, sure, Carl agreed quickly. Maria started to protest, but she found herself swept along as everyone hurried to get in line. I'll meet up with you in a bit, Claudia called to her. Claudia decided she had enough bumper cars for the night. She wanted to explore the boardwalk, and she needed a little time to herself. Besides, she thought, Joy and Sophie were obviously going to monopolize the boys, and she was sure Maria would go with them just to make sure they didn't invite Carl and Dean back to the house. So why should she tag along? Taking a bite of her cotton candy, Claudia made her way past a row of games and a small video game arcade. The noise on the boardwalk was so loud it drowned out the roar of the ocean, even though the beach was right beneath them. Beyond the arcade, the crowd thinned out. The lights grew dimmer. Claudia took a last lick of the empty paper cone, then tossed it into a trash basket. She licked her sticky fingers and gazed up at the sky. Slender wisps of gray clouds swam over a pale full moon high in the sky. Away from the game booths and food stands and crowds, the air felt cool and wet. I better turn around and go find my friends, she thought. As she turned, she saw that someone was standing nearby, staring intently at her. Startled, Claudia stopped and focused on him. She recognized his straight, dark hair and his intense, dark eyes at once. Daniel. The ghost boy, she cried aloud. Chapter 10. What did you call me? He moved quickly toward her, a smile forming on his handsome face. Nothing, Claudia stammered, embarrassed. Did you say I was a ghost? He demanded, his black eyes burning into hers as if looking for the answer to his question. No, Claudia didn't know what to say. Impulsively, she grabbed his hand and squeezed. The hand was cold. As cold as yesterday on the beach, she thought, surprised. As cold as death, the thought creeped into her mind. No, you're real, she told him, letting go quickly, smiling at him, her heart thudding. At least you feel real. I guess that's a compliment, he said with a shrug. It's just that when you helped me yesterday, you vanished before I could thank you, Claudia said awkwardly. You vanished like a ghost, and, well... Your name is Claudia, right? He asked, shoving his hands into the pockets of his denim shorts. He wore a white Gap t-shirt with a gray sweatshirt tied around his waist. Real clothing, Claudia thought, feeling a little guilty. So, what made me believe he was a ghost? What could I have been thinking of? Yeah, she said, Claudia Walker. Your burn doesn't look too bad, he said, his eyes examining her forehead. Do your friends do that to you a lot? Bury you in the sand and leave you there to roast? Not a lot, Claudia told him. They thought I had gone up to the house. Great friends, Daniel said, shaking his head. They're okay, Claudia replied, feeling defensive. What right did he have to put down her friends? He hadn't even met them. It was an accident, a mistake, she said. They had been ambling back toward the amusement area. Claudia found herself doing most of the talking. She told him how the girls had been in the same bunk at camp the summer before, and how surprised she was to receive Maria's invitation to come visit for a week. Daniel listened attentively, making quiet comments. He seemed shy to Claudia. Not uncomfortably shy, just shy. As they walked, his arm bumped hers softly. His dark eyes studied her. They stopped at the Ferris wheel. As it twirled, the bright yellow lights on its frame rose up against the black night sky like shooting stars. A cool breeze floated in off the ocean, fluttering Claudia's hair. Beautiful night, she murmured, smiling at Daniel. He held up his hand. Look, I have 2 tickets, he said, his eyes on the Ferris wheel. The line isn't very long. Let's go. Okay, I love Ferris wheels, she declared. I know, he said mysteriously, taking her hand and leading her to the line. Why is his hand so cold? Claudia wondered. What do you mean? How could you know? She demanded playfully. I'm a ghost, remember? I know all things. He grinned at her, a mischievous grin. A few moments later, Daniel handed the tickets to the young man running the ride. An empty seat rolled around. The wheel stopped. They stepped along a short ramp and climbed into the seat. As soon as the safety bar was pushed down in front of them, the seat lurched backward, and, with a jolt, they rose up off the ground. Claudia leaned back against the plastic seat. She was a little surprised to find Daniel's arm around the seat back. She rested her head against it, the breeze off the ocean cool against her face, and stared up at the sky. It's such a clear night, she said. We'll be able to see everything, the ocean, the entire boardwalk. He smiled. It's a full moon, he said softly, pointing with his free hand. Do you turn into a werewolf in a few minutes? Claudia teased. He growled at her. Make up your mind, he said. Am I a ghost or a werewolf? Do you live in town? She asked. No. He shook his head. A wave of black hair fell over his forehead. Well, where do you live? What are you doing here? Claudia asked. I live everywhere. I float through the night sky, he said, grinning. He leaned very close to her, lowering his arm from the seat back to her shoulders. I haunt people, he whispered with mock menace, bringing his face close to hers. Have you ever been all alone in the dark with a ghost before? He asked, lowering his voice to a whisper. Have you ever been this close to a ghost, Claudia? Is he going to kiss me? Claudia wondered. Do I want him to? Yes. She felt disappointed when he pulled back against the seat. Wow, look at the ocean, he said. It's unreal. As they rose higher, the ocean coming into view on their right, the full moon cast a wash of pale light over it, making the tossing water sparkle like silver. Beneath them stretched the crowded, noisy boardwalk. Turning to her left, Claudia could see the lights of Summerhaven, tiny and twinkling, as if the town were some kind of toy. You've been here longer than I have, she told Daniel, enjoying the weight of his arm around her shoulders. Point out the sights to me. Well, okay, he agreed reluctantly, leaning across her to see out the left side. He pointed. That's a building of some kind over there, and that's a red light, and that's a street, and there's a yellow light. He grinned at her, his face inches from hers. You're a great tour guide, she teased. I told you, I don't live here, he said, staring hard into her eyes. He's so good-looking, Claudia thought, and funny, and nice. Impulsively, she leaned forward and kissed him. He seemed startled at first, then returned her kiss. He's real, she found herself thinking. He's not a ghost. His lips were warm. The car suddenly rocked and came to an abrupt start. Oh! Claudia cried out, pulling away from him. She gazed down. They were at the very top. Why'd we stop? Daniel demanded, leaning over the safety bar to stare straight down, rocking the car gently. They're letting on more people, Claudia replied, the taste of his lips still on hers. She smiled at him. I like it up here. Look how big the moon is. I'll bet I could touch it, he said, following her gaze. He stood up, rocking the car violently. Here, I'll grab it, he said, reaching up with both hands. Daniel, sit down, Claudia cried. Leaning over the safety bar, he pretended to grab the moon. And as he reached, the seat jolted hard and tilted all the way forward. Claudia stared in horror as Daniel, his arms still outstretched, went sailing over the safety bar and fell headfirst to his death. Chapter 11. Before she could cry out, before she could even breathe, Claudia realized she wasn't watching Daniel fall. She was watching Allison. Allison. Poor Allison had been on Claudia's mind since arriving in Summerhaven. Now, once again, she was reliving the tragic accident that had taken Allison Drexel's life. Like a light flashing before a person's eyes, the tragedy of the previous summer appeared to Claudia, the stark horror of it washing over her as Daniel rocked the Ferris wheel car. Once again it was the previous July and she was back at Camp Full Moon. Claudia stretched out on her bunk, feeling limp from the damp afternoon heat. She swatted listlessly at a fly. She was convinced the insects liked Bunk 12's peculiar combination of scents, a mix of bug repellent, deodorant, and Maria's rosewater perfume. It was just after lunch, free time, when everyone was supposed to be in her bunk writing letters home. Luckily, Caroline, Claudia's counselor, was in love with a waterfront counselor, so Caroline was never around and none of them ever had to write letters. That afternoon, Claudia, Marie, Joy, and Sophie were playing a lazy game of Truth or Dare, and it was Joy's turn. She gave Claudia a sly look. Truth, she said. Tell us how many zits you have today. Claudia blushed as she realized Joy must have seen her in the latrine that morning examining her face. Would you rather have a dare? Joy asked idly as she applied pale pink polish to her toenails. 3, Claudia confessed, staring at the wooden floorboards. Big deal, so I don't have your flawless skin. The girls all laughed. Suddenly, the screen door banged open and Allison, Maria's younger sister, bopped in. Allison was a year younger than her sister. Like Maria, she was long and slender with blonde hair, but to Claudia she was much less sophisticated. Allison didn't have her sister's easy grace or natural athletic skills, and she wasn't the least bit likable. What are you guys doing? Allison asked. Nothing you'd be interested in, Joy assured her. Maria didn't even look up. Go away, fish face! Even Claudia, who had tried hard to like Allison, had to admit she was a world-class brat. She never hung out with the kids in her own bunk. She acted desperate to be accepted by Maria's friends and become part of Maria's group, which might have been okay if she weren't a snitch and a spy. Allison was always reporting their minor sins to the head counselor, always doing her best to get them in trouble. I want to play, Allison announced, dropping down on Maria's bunk. Can I play? I'm bored. You don't know what we're playing, Joy pointed out, frowning. Truth or dare, Allison said smugly. You're too young for it, Claudia told her. Go out and play in the traffic, Maria said coldly. You don't belong in here, Allison. I'll report you all, Allison threatened. You're supposed to be writing letters home. Fine, Maria said. You want to play? Then tell us about the time Mother caught you kissing Michael Jennings up in your bedroom. Huh? I never did, Allison insisted. That's a filthy lie. Wasn't he your boyfriend? Claudia asked Maria, unable to conceal the surprise in her voice. He was my boyfriend till Allison saw him, Maria said, scowling. You're lying, Allison insisted shrilly. You're a filthy liar. Oh, yeah, right, Maria replied sarcastically, rolling her eyes. Come on, Allie. You want to play the game? Tell my friends what you did to me. Come on, details. This is fascinating and all, Joy said in a weary tone. But couldn't Allison maybe leave so we can enjoy your game? Yeah, take a hike, Allison, Sophie said. Come on, Allison. Truth, Maria insisted. Either tell the truth or take the dare. Truth, Allie. What happens between you and Michael? Allison stared at the floor, then raised her eyes defiantly to her sister. I'll take the dare. You don't have to. You could just leave, Claudia pointed out. She suddenly didn't like the atmosphere in the small cabin. She had a bad feeling creeping up from her stomach, one of dread. I said I'll take the dare, Allison insisted, standing up angrily. Then I dare you to go back to your own bunk and stay there, Claudia suggested, grinning at Joy and Sophie. No, Maria ejected, her blue eyes lighting up. I have a better idea. Either tell us the truth or tonight you cross Grizzly Gorge under the full moon. Allison glared angrily at her sister, her face drained of color. They all knew how terrified she was of heights, and she wasn't exactly the most coordinated girl in the world. There was no way Allison could cross the log over the gorge, especially at night. Finally, Maria had come up with a way to make Allison leave them alone. All right, Allison said softly, her blue eyes locked on her sister's. I'll do it. What are you saying? Sophie cried. You will not, Allison. What time do you want to meet there? Allison asked, ignoring Sophie. Maria shrugged nonchalantly. How about after lights out, at 10? No problem, see you there, Allison said, and stalked out of the bunk. That night, just before 10, when they were sure Caroline was down by the mess hall with her boyfriend, the four girls crept out of the bunk one by one. It was a cool night, with the full moon yellow and low in a purple sky. Crickets chirped loudly. The trees whispered as they swayed in the soft breeze. They were halfway down the dirt path that led to the deep gorge, when a bright light bobbed through the woods, catching Maria in its beam. They heard Caroline's stern voice. All right, Drexel, you're busted. Where are your pals? Maria, muttering under her breath, stepped fully into the circle of light from the counselor's flashlight. The others remained silent, not moving, trying not to make a sound. Claudia crouched behind a tree, sure that her breathing would give her away. Caroline searched for them, moving the light along the trees that lined the path, but she quickly gave up and contented herself with marching Maria back to the bunk. Should we go back? Sophie whispered, when Caroline and Maria were out of sight. Yes, this is dumb, Claudia said, lingering by the big oak tree that had hidden her. No, Joy insisted. Caroline will only be waiting for us at the bunk. Besides, what if Allison is already at the gorge? We'd better go get her. They found Allison standing on the lip of the gorge, staring down at the Grizzly River below. It was at least a 20-foot drop, Claudia knew. A single log had been set across the gorge, its rough surface gleaming under the bright moonlight. Allison, go back to your bunk. This is crazy, Claudia told her, stepping up behind her. One look at her face and Claudia could see how frightened Allison was. Yeah, it's okay if you wimp out, Joyce said, her hands shoved into the back pockets of her jeans. It's too far down. If you fall. Don't do it, Allison, Sophie added, standing at the edge, peering down at the white foam of the rushing river. Allison ignored them. Where's my sister? She demanded, eyeing them tensely. Caroline called her and made her go back, Claudia replied. We should go back too. You'll have to tell Maria I did the dare, Allison said in a tight, choked voice. No, please, Joy cried. You've done it, haven't you? Allison snapped. You've all crossed the log. What makes you think I can't do it? We did it in the daytime, Claudia told her, and we're all very athletic. And we're not afraid of heights, Claudia added. Come on, Allison, Joy begged. Allison didn't say another word. Biting her lower lip, her eyes narrow with determination, she stepped out onto the log. No, Claudia gasped. The gorge was narrow, no more than 30 feet across, but if she fell, Allison would land on huge rocks in a shallow river, with current strong enough to carry her away. Allison, whoa, Joy called, her hands pressed against her cheeks. I can't look, Sophie declared, turning away from the gorge. Slowly, her legs trembling, Allison inched her way out onto the log. Allison, enough, Claudia called. You proved your point. You did it. Come back. Yeah, come back, Joy pleaded. Allison ignored their frightened words. Then, about 2/3 of the way out, she stopped, her knees buckling. She struggled to regain her balance. Oh, help, she said softly. I'm going to fall. No, you're not, Claudia told her, moving to the edge of the log. You're fine. Just sit down, turn around, and scoot back. Just then, Claudia saw darting, weaving circles of light play against the trees. It took her a moment to realize the light was coming from flashlights. Then she heard footsteps, voices. It's Caroline, Joy cried, and some of the other counselors. Run, Sophie shouted. Come on, we'll be caught. Come on, Allison, hurry, Claudia urged. I'm coming, Allison answered. Then the girls were running breathlessly, running back through the woods, away from the darting lights, away from the counselors. Claudia thought that Allison was right behind her. Claudia thought that Allison was running too. She didn't see Allison fall. She didn't hear the hard crack as Allison dropped into the boulder-strewn river and splash as she was tossed into the rushing water. She honestly believed Allison was right behind her, and so she ran from the counselor's lights, ran through the dark woods, ran through the cold black shadows, ran. Now Claudia felt a hand on her shoulder. She swallowed hard and gazed into Daniel's eyes. You okay? He asked softly. She blinked, startled to discover that she wasn't in Camp Full Moon. She was sitting next to Daniel in the Ferris wheel car, and the wheel was moving smoothly again, carrying them down to the brightly lit park. You didn't fall? She blurted out. He shook his head, his eyes narrowing in confusion. Fall? You mean out of the seat? He laughed. I thought, Claudia felt dizzy. The ground was rushing up to meet her. It took her a while to realize it was the movement of the Ferris wheel. I'm a ghost, remember? Daniel teased. I fell out, but I floated back in. She forced a smile. Allison. You've been in the back of my mind all this time, Allison, Claudia thought with a shiver. That's why I saw you just now. You fell. You fell, not Daniel. You fell, Allison. Such a terrible accident. A short while later, the chair stopped on the platform, swaying gently. Daniel helped Claudia out. That was cool, he said, his dark eyes sparkling. Yeah, it was great, Claudia agreed, still a little shaky. Thanks, Daniel. They started walking along the boardwalk, nearly colliding with two boys winding rapidly toward them on rollerblades. I've got to find Maria and the others, Claudia told him. Do you want to come along? I want to prove to them that... Hey! He was gone. Vanished again. What is going on here? Claudia wondered. Claudia! Claudia! Over here! Familiar voices called. Claudia spun around to see her friends waving to her in front of a brightly lit dark game booth. Joy was carrying a hideous pink teddy bear. Dean and Carl gave Claudia a wave and took off. Her three friends came hurrying over to Claudia. Where did you run off to? Maria demanded. Yeah, we all had a great time, Joy gushed. The boys are nice when you get to know them. Have you just been wandering around by yourself? Maria asked, her eyes studying Claudia. Yeah, Claudia told them. I enjoyed it, really. I just like watching people at places like this, you know? Look what Carl won, Joy cried, holding up the ugly pink bear. He gave him to me. I'm going to name him Carl. Looks just like him, Maria said dryly. Chattering excitedly, the four girls headed to the car to go home. Later, Claudia lay in bed thinking about Daniel, about their kiss, about how handsome and mysterious he was. A soft breeze floated in from the open glass doors and gently cooled her skin. She realized she hadn't learned a thing about Daniel. She didn't know where he lived or what he was doing at the beach this summer. She didn't even know his last name. She had just drifted into a light sleep when the shrill screams awoke her. Claudia jerked straight up, breathing hard. The screams, she realized, were coming from Joy's room.